You ever listen to a podcast or a panel discussion and somebody makes a point and everybody agrees with the point, and then they make another point and everybody agrees with the point? That's great, and consensus is wonderful, but sometimes I like to hear a little spirited discussion when there's actual disagreement, because how else do you learn? How else do you get two sides of an issue to really understand it better? And I think for me, I learn a lot more from a bit of respectful sparring than I do just from taking everything at face value. And so I am so excited about the show that we have for you today. The whole genesis of it came from something that I read and vehemently disagreed with and thought, well, let's talk about it. Let's talk it out. So first of all, welcome to the Media Roundtable. Friends, this is a special edition where we dive into the secrets of the craft on behalf of people that are really in the industry, and it's all in service of what we affectionately call the Chief Audio Officer, which, by the way, just in the world that we live in today in the last 6 months has become a very confusing word because audio used to represent podcasts, and now apparently podcasts are video to half the people and audio to the other half. And to some people, it has no definition at all. So if you work in the field of podcasting in any format, if you are responsible for helping a brand grow, this is ground zero for conversations that matter. And hopefully I actually not just talk about the industry, but impact the industry. I'm Dan Granger, CEO of Oxford Road. You may have heard we are now combined and joined forces with Veritone One, which now makes us officially the largest buyer of podcast media in the world. But at the end of the day, I am but a lowly schlepper of spots. Let's talk about the show. We have a guest who is a very powerful mind in the world of creativity and marketing and business. His name is Steve Pratt. He is the founder of The Creativity Business, which is a firm that focuses on attention, strategy, differentiation, content strategy, marketing, and many things in that realm. He's also an author of a book that we should all commit to memory, and it's called Earn It, Unconventional Strategies for Brave Marketers, with a little bit of Saving Private Ryan flair. Steve, thank you for coming to the Media Roundtable. I'm so glad to have you.
I'm really glad to be here too. And honestly, I'm so excited to have a conversation with someone who vehemently disagrees with me, because I don't know if I've had very many people being like, I vehemently disagree with what you put out there. So
well, we should vehemently disagree more.
I know. I am open to, like, I'm coming in with an open mind where you may persuade me that I am completely wrong and that I need to rethink everything I know as well. So,
well, and like spiritually, I try to take the Gandhi view of I am open to change as new information presents itself to me. The hard part is we've had 30 interviews this year debating the definition of a podcast. So I've gotten pretty entrenched, but I would say I'm still movable, even though we did publish a definition to the industry. I stand by it today. We can talk about it and we can debate that. Let's talk about the Post, okay? So I'm reading the daily trades, and I think it was probably Pod News surfaced a story that said, hey, Steve Pratt has published something that says Joe Rogan isn't a podcast. And I immediately said, hey, can we talk about this on the Media Roundtable? Because that's really what this is for. So there's a lot we can get into. I do want to talk about your background, your book, and all of the great insights you have that marketers can benefit from. But let's just start there. Joe Rogan isn't a podcast. Convince me.
Okay, well, so there's two pieces to this. So there's one is the Joe Rogan piece, and which has more to do with video strategy for podcasters than anything. And then there's the actual what is a podcast piece from my own point of view and background. So maybe if I just start with my own background and what I think of a podcast as, and it kind of leads to the Joe Rogan piece. So I've been doing this for like a eerily long time. Like I realized, I think it was 2 weeks ago, the first podcast I was ever part of making was 20 years old. So it was 2005.
Wow.
At Canada's public broadcaster. We made one of the world's first legal music podcasts at this place called CBC Radio 3. And I just remember very, very clearly, everyone back then knew exactly what a podcast was. I was listening to the Daily Source Code and hearing Adam Curry talk about all these crazy tech setups to figure out how to, publish and record and load it onto your iPod and stuff. But it was very clear. It was a distribution method. It was about an RSS feed, and it was an audio file that would go on an RSS feed. That's what it was. And then when video podcasting came out, it was any sort of video distributed on an RSS feed. So it was really no debate about what a podcast was. If it was distributed on RSS, it was a podcast. It could be a video podcast or an audio podcast. Done.
By the way, just for the records, when did video first get distributed through RSS?
I'm trying to remember because I think it was like the video iPod came out. It was a few years after that. I'm guessing 2008, 2009, something like that.
That feels right.
Yeah. And so I remember like we made a podcast, a video podcast at CBC Radio 3 that had nothing to do with our audio podcasts at all, because the audio podcast would have been horribly boring as video. It would have been like a DJ in a booth hitting a play button, on music and stuff. And we had a video producer make an amazing original show, like a video show that today would just be called a YouTube show, called R3TV, and it was distributed via RSS. So it was a video podcast. And then I think, as time went on, audio podcasts started streaming on certain platforms. And then video started coming back, but it was on YouTube and streaming on different platforms. And then people started calling shows that, just happened to be, I guess from my perspective, like not even necessarily a show that was available on audio, a podcast that was just a talk show on YouTube that had giant microphones on it.
It was like kind of a Wayne's World thing, and guys like Tom Green coming in and experimenting. If it was underground, then it was a podcast, right? Or like didn't have the infrastructure of big networks and stuff like that. Is that kind of how you think it was thought of?
Yeah, and even today, it still feels a little bit, even though I know that there are large companies and networks behind a lot of these things, I think it feels more like a personal, democratized medium where someone is putting out an episodic series that people attach to. And I think my confusion personally these days is it's almost like if you call whatever you're putting out a podcast and people accept it as a podcast, is it a podcast? Like, I don't know. Like, is Hot Ones a podcast? I don't know what the difference is between Hot Ones and Joe Rogan in some weird way, other than I don't think Hot Ones is actually available in audio, but they don't call it a podcast. But if they did, I think everyone would be like, oh yeah, of course it's a podcast.
And it gets more confusing than that. Does YouTube call it a podcast?
Yeah,
because YouTube calls a lot of things podcasts, and I think you're hitting on the chaos that those of us that work in this industry are living in, because nobody's really agreed around a common definition.
Yeah, and I guess in some ways, what is the difference between a YouTube creator and someone who creates something that they call a podcast that is only on YouTube? I don't know. I don't know what the answer is, other than in some ways, I think audiences, it's a signal that it's a show that has a certain aesthetic to it or something like that. Like, it certainly is not defined by distribution anymore at all. And in some ways, I guess part of me is curious. Like, I'm kind of keen to ask you, does it matter? Like, if everyone thinks this is what a podcast is and a whole bunch of new things are being considered podcasts that were never traditionally considered podcasts, does that matter? Is that a good thing for podcasting, that more people talk about podcasting and it's in the zeitgeist and more people are going to want to buy ads in whatever is called a podcast because people like podcasts?
I'll give you my view on that, just because we've been having this conversation. We put out a white paper on it. We did an Edison study of, thousands of Americans to see, what do they think it is? And it's so interesting because who should get to decide, right? Does the publisher decide? Does the platform, does YouTube get to decide what a podcast is? Does the audience decide? Do consumers generally decide? So I probably have a couple different answers depending on, who you're talking to. I think that if a consumer thinks it's a podcast, then to that consumer, it certainly is, whatever format, right? I agree with you that we've kind of moved past it being defined by distribution. And I think as soon as people stopped using iPods, I think the 2014 birth of the smartphone really killed clinical definition that made it about, limited it to one point of distribution, right? But then what did it become, and is it a moving target? There is a camp and a school of thought that says, don't limit it. Why put it in a box? Because you're going to keep it from thriving. And so everything's a podcast. And my feeling about that is, if everything is a podcast, then nothing is a podcast. And you can't be everything. I don't go to a movie theater and watch a podcast, at least not yet, right? There are some forms of media that I think we generally can agree, whether you're in the industry, advertising, whatever, some things definitely are and some things definitely aren't, but it's very gray in terms of where you draw those lines. And to just answer your question directly, does it matter? I think it doesn't to the consumer necessarily in a direct way. It does indirectly, but it matters a lot to the industry and the amount of investment that is made in the medium. I think it's of great importance. Like just an example, a lot of the things that made podcasts famous were the serials and a lot of the work that was done by Wondery, doing these long audio-driven investigative shows. You don't really see those coming out anymore because they're so expensive and you don't have the same amount of capital coming in to support the infrastructure and the investment to make those assets. At the end of the chain, the consumer now has a different set of opportunities of what they get to listen to that is actually very much tied to the definition. So I think it does impact consumers, where I think it really, like, the ground zero for the impact is the business of podcasting. If you're a podcaster, how much money you can make. If you're a publisher, how much you can invest. And if you're an advertiser, because it starts with the advertiser, and the confusion among advertisers is profound. And because we have kind of a front row seat to this, dealing with our clients every day, they have to figure out how to budget. At the end of the day, they got a pot of money and they got to go, well, what goes into the TV budget, and what is TV, and what is social, and what is YouTube, and what is, you've got all these different categories. And podcasting, in some businesses, gets rolled into a radio budget, and in some businesses it gets rolled into an influencer budget, and some people actually carve it out. But now, in the last, since YouTube really, I think this is a byproduct of the presidential election, I think that's when everything got a little hectic here, and everybody started claiming podcasts because they kind of saw its power demonstrated. And so for us, I think because advertisers don't know how to budget, because they don't know what they're budgeting for in a consistent way, I think it makes it very hard to monetize. And with all the confusion that we have in the different measurement systems that are required, you see a lot of, what people would agree are podcasters not getting as much of the monetization that they could. They're actually getting shorted on revenue because there are advertisers that are opting out and saying, if it's on too many types of platforms, I can't measure it all the same way, I don't want to touch it. It's too much. Or they'll only buy one piece of it, but not the whole thing. And it's just created a lot of confusion. And I think it's become a big distraction for the market when we could otherwise just be figuring out how to have some common ground. So what I'd love to do is, I would love to read to you, I don't know if you've seen it, but I'd love to read to you the definition we landed on and just get you to react to that. See if you could agree that if there were to be a technical definition, whether or not you think this one connects.
Yeah, for sure.
So here's where we landed. And there's actually a definition for a podcast and then a video podcast. A podcast is an on-demand audio-driven program, featuring episodic content across wide-ranging themes and formats, traditionally delivered via open RSS and conversational in nature. It can include platform-based distribution and is commonly supplemented by video. It's a bit of a mouthful. So,
I agree with everything except for the conversational-based piece. Even though to me, that feels like that's what it's come to mean to a lot of people. But I think it puts it in a box, like to your point around Serial, or Missing Richard Simmons, or like some of those narrative driven ones it's a harder business model to put out there. I know there's maybe the conversational piece is because a host is talking to you intimately in your ear, but I feel like conversational to me feels like it's a little bit more off the cuff. And I feel like some of those shows are just so well produced and written. I still remember listening to S-Town and being like, man, this is like literature level structure and
It's
writing.
good stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so, to me, that all still fits in podcast land. I would like to see more expansion of formats of what's possible in audio and to not have it limited to people just thinking it's conversations. And I know why it is because it's the easiest form to do from a democratization of the platform. That is the most accessible, easiest to produce type of content. And it's like,
historically, right?
yeah. And maybe that's, I don't know what the percentage is. It's probably over 95% of all podcasts are conversational. But if you look at the ones that pop and hit the radar and have put podcasting on the map, there's something extra quality wise and narrative wise about those. Anyways, I won't belabor it, but
I hear your point. Well, and frankly, I totally agree with you. And so, I know it's hard because we're talking about this verbally, but the way we wrote it is traditionally.
Okay. Yeah.
Traditionally delivered via open RSS and conversational in nature. So it's not to say exclusively for that exact reason. And we tried to stay as loose as we could and keep the tent as wide as we could. But yeah, I do think that needs a lane and does need to stay protected. And I hope that if anybody uses this, the way they interpret that is to create space for that, because I think we want the same outcome. And then let me read you what we said a video podcast is, because there's a slight nuance and we have to deal with the YouTube factor, right?
Yep.
Because they have a section you can view their podcasts, right? But so what are those? It's an episodic on-demand program centered on spoken word content where synchronized visuals meaningfully shape the experience. But I think the catch there is that, yes, the content has to be it's not just you threw a camera on and continued the conversation. There was a value, an incremental value in the video component, but it is still driven by the spoken word, centered on that content. And then we use a shorthand just to say, if it works with your eyes closed, it's a podcast.
Yeah.
So that's kind of, that's the best we were able to come up with. And that was, taking as many stakeholder perspectives as we could, but the cement is wet. And, if there's any revisions, you're a great mind in the marketplace and do value your views.
Okay. So maybe just a couple questions on it. What does synchronized visuals mean?
Synchronized visuals, meaning that there are things that your eyes can see that are happening in coordination with the words that you're hearing. So
it doesn't have to be like just the exact same talking heads doing it. Like you can have related B-roll or other footage that's somehow related to what they're talking about in it.
Yeah, I think that it should be in coordination, but I think the key to it is that it actually is a value add.
Yeah.
That you're having a slightly different experience than you would if you took it through the ears only.
Actually, it's interesting. Like even, and this is again a question where I'm not sure ultimately what constitutes a podcast, depending on whether it's in the name or not, right? Like, like if you took, I don't know.
Yeah, if you want to pick a random media sample and we can run it through the definition and go, does this actually? So would this be a podcast? That's an interesting, exercise if you got something you're thinking about.
Well, I guess it's interesting to me to think about like shows that you can't visualize. Like if you put, it's funny. I have this friend who's kind of at the forefront of doing a lot of AI filmmaking, and you see how good all these AI video generators are doing, right? To the point where it's indistinguishable from a lot of real life stuff. The VO3 stuff is
crazy,
mind-boggling, right?
Yeah.
To me, there's like something sitting there for audio only podcast that can never have visuals that could be transformed into something really interesting visually if you wanted to. I don't know whether it would work on YouTube, but I think there's some interesting experimentation to be had of like, how could you visualize this to make it a really stunning visual experience?
Yeah.
That is additive to an audio only experience for something that you would never have visuals for in an audio only experience. I don't know whether that becomes, I don't know whether that's a podcast, but I know that if I was on YouTube and I didn't have any visuals, or they were really boring visuals that were not going to attract an audience because it's not designed for how video is consumed, I would be experimenting with thinking like, how can I add a bunch of things that are going to make this more compelling for people who want visual content? And then I don't know where it ceases to be a podcast. Like, I guess that's my question is like, where's the line where somebody's like, oh, this is my podcast? Are we going to say like, actually, that's no longer a podcast?
Well, I think there are YouTube videos that if you close your eyes, it has no value. I just was going through as an exercise. I was looking at where an advertiser is running ads on YouTube shows. And like some of these things are like science experiments and you're watching a cause and effect. And if you can't see it, it is pointless, right? And so I think to me, a podcast has to stay rooted in the spoken word. If it's not anchored by that, we're probably talking about something else. We probably stretch the definition a little too far. You know, one of the things we try to champion on this show and through our agency is for advertisers to have a big tent and reach audiences wherever their consumers are. Sometimes those customers that we are so reliant on engaging with your business, sometimes they love content that is coming from a left point of view, and sometimes it's on the right. And the good news is you don't have to get all caught up in the culture wars as an advertiser. You, like us, can have a big tent and go to where your customers are. And let me tell you one place that customers are highly responsive in our experience, and that is with the Daily Wire. The Daily Wire was founded by Ben Shapiro, who is a friend of this program and somebody that I go back a ways with. And I will tell you, I don't know if anyone in this industry has driven more results for more brands than the Daily Wire. They have truly built brands from scratch by delivering performance you just can't get elsewhere because their customers and their audience trust them. For over a decade, they have been challenging norms, amplifying influential conservative voices, and helping brands grow. So if you're a chief audio officer and you're responsible for delivering results for your brand, here are some things you'd like about working with the Daily Wire. One is transparency. People play a lot of games in this business, not so with the Daily Wire. When they give us numbers, and our media team attests to this, what you see is what you get. There is no obfuscation. They really give clarity about the impressions that are being delivered, so you know that you're getting your money's worth. And a lot of times there's added value to be had. The next piece of it is they really have an audience first approach. They take listener feedback seriously, which ends up helping the advertisers. So let me give you an example. You know, you've heard us talk a lot about ad load and how it's increasing in the podcasting industry. We have pushed back about that and said they should have limits. The Daily Wire has gotten this feedback not just from us, but from their listeners, and they have reduced the number of ads that they'll run in an hour. And that actually not only gives the listener a better experience, it helps make the ads work better too. The last thing I would call out is host engagement. They are not too busy to get to know a brand. They really get involved with a product. They'll use the product, become customers of the product, and be able to give firsthand endorsements that are authentic and give you real results. And like I said, we've been working with them since the beginning for more than a decade, and just seeing miracles happen through performance. And so, you know, they have shows that are a little more on the firebrand side. They have some stuff that's a little bit more brand safe, like the Morning Wire. But whatever you're looking for, if you're looking for results, you should be looking at the Daily Wire. Here's what you're going to do. Reach out to, here's the address, so get your pen ready. Advertise with us at dwventures.com. The DW stands for Daily Wire. Let me give it to you one more time. Reach out to advertise with us at dwventures.com. And some of the struggle that I've had, because I've been screwing around with this for 20 years. You know, I was pushing podcasting in 2006. You were doing stuff even before that, but
we both have a long
time at it, right?
Yes.
But I think that, you know, there's a spirit in it that I don't want to see snuffed out and diluted. That is that kind of pirate radio spirit. And there is something that you can't just, it's not a conventional network television show. It's not just any video that you choose to post. There is something unique. And I think we do need to provide a definition for that to continue. Otherwise, then everything is a show. And what we started with in an industry that really became such a dominant force, why did it affect the outcome of a presidential election? Why is it that it became a cultural phenomenon and everybody from world-class athletes and A-list celebrities, what were they trying to tap into? Was it just that, oh, well, they wanted to make a show? Or was there something unique to the medium that we want to preserve? We have to be elastic, and we can't just say, well, it's whatever Steve Jobs said 20 years ago. Fine, yeah, that's where it started. But what was it about what he was describing that we want to hold today, even as we adapt to the changes in technology around us? It has to evolve, but I don't want to see it all get washed away, because I think there's something there that's worth protecting. And I think there's something there that's important for brands and for creators, frankly. I mean, we talk about this cereal example. And, one thing that gets lost when all video is podcast, and it isn't limited to things that work with your eyes closed, is the theater of the mind. And now that we have the ability, and, whether it's yesterday or 6 months from now, that you can truly click a button and get like lifelike visuals that do correspond with the audio for like 2 cents. Like, yes, that is an option. But think about what we deprive our own minds to be able to imagine. Think about when you read a book and you see the characters, and then you go see the movie of the book and you're disappointed because you're like, that's not what that person looks like.
This is where I want to jump in. This is where I think maybe we will agree, but this is the crux of the Joe Rogan thing for me.
Yes.
People consume things in different contexts and different ways. And I don't think you have to choose one over the other. And I don't think if you make a fabulous video piece, it compromises your ability to make an unbelievable audio experience that plays to all the strengths of audio, theater of the mind, all those pieces, right? Like, I know that people in cars are not going to be using screens. I know when you're out walking your dog or cooking or all those sorts of things, like, there are environments and contexts in all of our lives where audio is by far the best medium of choice, and where that's what we want, and that we can deliver magical experiences. And I don't think we should ever compromise the ability to deliver value for those people in those contexts. But there's also a reality that lots and lots and lots of people are in contexts at different stages of their day or different rooms of the house, different locations where they are in a screen first context. And if we don't deliver them a magical screen first experience, I think your business is trying to grow your overall audience. You're leaving some stuff on the table. And I think everybody can make their own choice and saying, I don't want to do video, and that's totally fine. And if my particular podcast is going to be best, and if it's audio only and it's going to be compromised if I add other things to it, I have no problem with that at all. But if all sorts of people are spending more and more time on YouTube in different screen first contexts, why we wouldn't design for that and optimize for that and think about what are the strengths of a screen-based medium? I fundamentally don't understand why you wouldn't do that. Like I mentioned in the article, I remember very clearly so many times when video crews would come in and deliver all these stacks of tapes and say, make a podcast out of this. It's all done. And we'd be all up in arms being like, we can't do this. This has been shot for television. You have to design something audio first. You can't just take video stuff and turn it into audio. And I still believe that. But the reverse is also true, is you can't just take audio and record it on Zoom and think that lots of people are going to suddenly watch because it has video. I think you just, like any content strategist, should think like, how do you play to the strengths of each medium, and how do you design an experience for the contexts that people are in and the what each medium does really, really well. I think that is the part that Joe Rogan has done very, very well, is he has got a multi-platform strategy that I would argue is video first. He's on a set. He's got multiple cameras. He's got lighting. It is millions and millions and millions of people consume it on YouTube. I can't imagine that he would ever compromise his video experience to enhance the audio experience. And I think my point in writing it was, look at all the people on YouTube who are doing successful video podcasts. They're thinking about video and what makes video successful, and whether it's a set, whether it's in-person guests, whether it is like multiple cameras and editing. They're actually thinking from a multi-platform perspective and not just tacking on something to an audio strategy.
So let me tell you part of what you're saying where I agree, and then part where I think we actually do have a clear disagreement. So one thing I've often said about, I hope what all these platforms end up doing is, you look behind me and you see the 405. I don't know if you can see it, but like you got like 6 lanes on the highway, right? And I hope that one of those lanes is carved out for things that are purely designed for an audio only experience.
Yeah, me too.
I hope that doesn't go away.
I don't think it will. I don't think it will.
I believe that podcasting as a term, at least for the foreseeable future, is here to stay. There's enough money behind it. There's enough FANG involvement now that like people are going to want to stay involved in that. And so I hope that the definition allows all those lanes to stay under the definition as we've offered it, whether or not everybody has to use our definition. The way we're doing it, and we're buying a lot of podcasts on behalf of brands, we want to anchor around something with some definition, and I hope it holds both of those vehicles. So I agree with that. I agree that if you're going to have a video, I mean, look, what am I doing right now, right? I asked you to come onto our podcast, and I'm very cognizant of the background that we're talking in. Like, I did comb my hair today. I might not have if this were just an audio only thing, right? So I think, yeah, you're gonna adapt if the camera's on, even if not everybody's watching. Where I think there is still maybe a fundamental disagreement is, I hear you using
disagreement.
Well, let's see. Let's see if you vehemently disagree with me. What you said is you have to design for the medium. And if you have to design for the medium, then it can't be elastic to both. You can't take an audio radio show and put it on video. You can't take a video and put it on audio, and that you must customize. And I think the fact that
you can design for both. I do. I think you can design for both. I just think that you have to design for something that plays to the strengths of both mediums, and that I think there's
and in my view, I'm like, it wouldn't hurt, right? But like, if you're watching Rogan and you're into the interview, let's say I was watching the conversation he had with Bono, right? And then I had to drive to the airport. Well, did I stop? Did I still finish the episode even though I couldn't watch it anymore? No, I took it with me, right? And like you're saying, that's omni-channel. And are you going to cater to the medium that is visual when you have that added element? Of course. But that doesn't mean you can't have an audio feed, and that he shouldn't have an audio feed and you can't enjoy it through audio as a standalone, even if you don't have the luxury of being able to stay stationary and watch.
And I'm not arguing that either. Just
so we don't disagree on anything. So is Joe Rogan a podcast or not?
Well, it's I guess in a way, like and I feel like in a way it was like, maybe I miswrote the headline where it's more like, when you did good
marketing, you did brave marketing.
I think when you read the article, you realize like it's really around, like, if you think about podcasting as an audio only medium or an audio first medium. Yeah. Joe Rogan is not a podcast in that sense. He is a multi-platform creator who has a property, and he executes it on a bunch of different platforms. And one of them he does very, very well as a podcast. But I would argue that some of the other things, like, it's designed for social clips, right? Like, I get as much value out of seeing him on TikTok as I do on podcasting. And I wouldn't say his TikTok clips are a podcast, but he's very successful there.
Well, and my argument to that, I don't think podcast clips are successful because they're visual. I think it looks fine, but I don't think it's like, oh, you really had to see the face they were making. They were doing, I mean, maybe Elon smoking the joint was a visual thing that, like, that stood out, right? But by and large, when he's having one of these conversations and it's clippable, I think it's the fact that YouTube just has such a strong promotional engine. And the secret here is that it isn't that the visual was so necessary to shape the experience. It's the fact that YouTube's visual component allows for promotion in a way that audio could never achieve. When you're dealing in a world of sound, you can't suggest all of these different things to play next to me and let me just tap it and get a quick understanding of all the relevant options And now all of a sudden, because the YouTube platform is such a powerful promotional engine, the cross promotion and the ability to hype it up and run ads on it, you couldn't do that through a sound only platform. So to me, dirty little secret there, it's about marketing the show more so than it's about how incrementally interesting the visual of that moment was.
Yeah. But I will say, like, and maybe the other big piece that I'm trying to advocate for, and especially if you're trying to do both at the same time, like to design for both.
Yeah.
I know there's always going to be examples that break this, but like if you think about most of the shows that come to mind when you think of like what is a successful YouTube podcast, it usually has a set with in-person guests, right? Like most of them have a set, and that they're doing face-to-face things with real people. They're not Zoom or Riverside or Descript recordings.
You mean the hits? You mean the
well, the
big
ones that,
ones.
well, and I think, my argument for that is like, well, that's not an accident. Like that's actually considering what works on YouTube. It looks like a show, right?
Yeah.
And if I said to you, like, how would you like to watch Oprah, or how would you like to watch a Zoom call with two people for an hour? They're two really different propositions, right?
Yeah.
And I get like if you and I were on a set and we had lights and there was a director and there was like 3 or 4 cameras and there was like a produced opening to this show that had like all sorts of Diary of a CEO style opening on it, I bet 10 times as many people, maybe 100 times more people would watch this episode than what it will be. And it's just very, the way that podcasting's video strategy has evolved is from an audio only place till we went into COVID and all this amazing technology came out that allowed us to do things that for audio, a lot of the time you'd hire tape syncs, you'd hire real humans to go out and gather audio face to face with other people. Video, if you're making a documentary, you send a crew out into the field. It was not possible to do this for a long time. And I think this is the really easy way of doing things for audio people. And we're all used to Zoom calls, but it doesn't mean that that's actually going to make for compelling YouTube content. And I think that is my biggest thing that I'm just like, but
yeah,
who's going to sign up to watch Zoom calls all day? No one.
Well, no, I mean, I think that's interesting. I think if I care about the content, to me, that may be incremental rather than exponential. But to your argument, where I want to just underscore a real point of alignment is, you think about Rogan, right? And why is it that all his guests are in studio? And why will he not leave it? And why doesn't he Zoom anybody? And he absolutely could. Now, I think there's probably 2 arguments here. And I think one of them is the one that you've made, which is that it's a better experience when you see them talking to each other in a room. But I would also say there is something powerful about a face-to-face in-person experience that does shift the dynamic.
Yeah, I agree.
And you can watch an interesting roundtable. Like you'll see a lot of celebrity roundtables during COVID where they're all zooming in, and that's cool. But when they're actually all sitting next to each other at a table, that is cooler. And I think it's probably part the visual, but at least as much the fact that because they're there, you're also seeing them interact to each other in an interesting way. They have to make space for each other. There's a lot of primal stuff that goes on in that. So I think there's definitely an enhancement and a benefit to doing that if that is, the design and the purpose of the program. So it turns out maybe we're not so different after all, you and I. And
vehement agreement.
Vehement agreement. I am in violent agreement with you on this topic.
I just thought of a weird one that would be an interesting one to talk about if we have time.
Yeah.
Are you familiar with Kill Tony?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Is that a podcast? Yeah, so for people who don't know, this is filmed in Joe Rogan's Comedy Club. I think it claims to be the #1 live podcast in the world. It's a panel of judges in a comedy club that is streamed live on YouTube. And it's basically like a bucket full of names where you pull out a name and someone comes out backstage and has a minute to do stand up in front of the panel of judges. And they get roasted. I don't even know if it's audio, but they call it a podcast. It's not conversational. It's not an interview show. It's a live event that's streamed on YouTube, but yet it's a podcast, or at least they call it a podcast. These are the ones that are like, oh, that's a weird outlier. I'm curious.
Well, so in my definition, it is still a podcast and probably a video podcast, because I think the dynamic of the comedy club, I think you pick up on stuff if you can see it more so. So I think it meaningfully shapes the experience. But that's where people are starting to get so confused, is they don't know what bucket to put it in.
Yeah.
And if you don't know what bucket to put it in, how are you supposed to sell it to an advertiser? Right? How do you classify it? Is it a movie? Is it a TV show? Is everything a show? Right? As some people would put forth. And I'm saying, I think Kill Tony is. It's not always a brand safe one, as we learned at Madison Square Garden, but but it is. I think it is because it is led with the spoken word, and I think the spoken word is its own medium that is probably as powerful and persuasive as anything else. One of the other defining things, we thought about putting this in the definition, but for other reasons too boring to get into, we didn't. But the nature of the advertising that goes in there, I know I see everything through the lens of advertising, but I actually think a hallmark of what makes something a podcast is the ability for the host of the show to actually voice commercials, because I think that already is a tell that this is a different type of content, and there's a lack of professionalism. There's a level of authenticity that it's kind of like, yeah, but we're just kind of doing this thing here. You're not going to see that on TV. And there are certain types of shows that you won't see that on, and they usually are more visual in nature. So I think, these are things that in my view impact what our definitions should be. And I say should because I think it helps the industry grow, and I think it eliminates confusion for users, consumers, listeners, watchers. I think if they can have something to go, okay, these all fall into a range, even though there's some elasticity within that range. I think so. I don't know. What do you think?
It's funny. It's one of those things where, I did a lot of work with brands at Pacific Content, and, in some ways, some of the themes that just kept coming up over and over again is, the brand isn't what you say it is. It's what everybody thinks of when they think of you. And I think that's probably, you mentioned off the top, like, what do audiences think? It's hard to disagree. Like, if pop culture decides that Kill Tony is a podcast,
who are we to tell them they're wrong?
Yeah,
right?
Exactly. And in some ways, it's almost like, okay, well, how do we adjust to that as an industry, and how do we sell that? And how do we do integrated buys that make sense for people with metrics across platforms, where a buyer can be like, yeah, I love buying podcasts, whether they're on YouTube only, audio only, multi-channel pieces. Can I buy a podcast on TikTok and Instagram too? Of course you can. I think we just have to figure out how to tell that story in a way that it really makes sense for advertisers. And I'm glad that you're digging into all this and figuring it out. So
we're trying, right?
Yeah.
And I don't think there's a perfect answer, but I think my view is we need an answer. Let's do the best we can and talk to the smartest people about it, and talk to the consumers and see what they think. I'm not an audio purist to say it's RSS only, it's audio only. I don't believe that. I think we need a big tent, but that tent should have some limits on it. Then it ends up meaning nothing. And there's so many people bandwagoning on this idea of podcasting that if there's no walls around it anywhere, then eventually it'll die and go away. And I want to protect the good part.
As part of the Pacific Content stuff, my job was, we were never doing video. Like, it was always to sell the power of audio. And I don't think that the strengths of audio are going to go away. And you would know this better than anybody too. I mean, I'm preaching to the choir, obviously, but the amount of time and engagement that you get from audio compared to video, like the completion rates and the
different, right?
And the depth of engagement. And, you brought up the theater of the mind, all those pieces. I don't know if there's anything on the planet that is better than audio at that. And I think there's a real premium for that, not only from a marketing and branding standpoint, but from an ad sales point of view, that you're actually in somebody's ears and they're picturing a whole bunch of stuff going on when you do it well.
Yeah.
And you're getting, again, if you do it well, 80, 90, 95% completion rates on a half hour show. That's a remarkable thing that is just impossible to get on any other platform or medium. And I think that as we think about, like, how do we talk about selling it? It's, again, almost like, what are the strengths of each medium from a monetization point of view and from a marketing and branding point of view.
I agree with you. And there's just been so much hype around video and video's importance. And all anybody can hear is it's all video now. That's what you hear. But we know the conversion rates. We know the completion rates to support what you're saying. There is a market for it, but I think it's going to probably take a few years for somebody to go, no, to let the smoke clear a little bit and the dust settle. And somebody says, actually, turns out pure audio content is very, very valuable. And I don't know, maybe 3 to 5 years from now, somebody has a brilliant idea and says, hey, there's a new feature on this platform, or there's a new app and we call it radio. And and it's really for that which is designed for nothing but sound, because I think the ubiquity and how accessible video is now actually creates scarcity in that, and people aren't really going to take the financial risk to go there yet, but I think they will, and that'll become its own business and its own lane. But I think it's going to take a minute. I think
Here's
some
another
of this
weird
stuff's
hot
going to
take
take
on
time.
the audio thing as you're talking about that. When we talk about, predominantly conversation based.
Yeah.
I feel like there is still an enormous amount of blue ocean for most podcasters in embracing the full power of audio. That conversation is one of them, but there's a lot of conversationalists that do not tell stories very well. There's a lot of conversation podcasts that don't think about music or sound design or any of those sorts of things that create that theater of the mind stuff that you were talking about. That's incredibly powerful. And I think that, that is what I miss about having more of those narrative based shows, where they really just took you on a journey where you were in your head imagining all these amazing things that are being described, and you're feeling it, right? I don't think there's any other medium that gives you that. And the opportunities for audio to kind of find a business model that supports more of that, or for tools that, make it more efficient to build those into shows. That's also where I think all the monetization efforts it's going to be a much clearer value proposition when that is fully embraced.
Well, let me know when you're ready to launch it, because definitely I think you're onto the right stuff. I want to be cognizant that we're running out of time here, and we haven't even really gotten to like 2/3 of our. There's so much for us to talk about, and this will be an ongoing conversation. I really am enjoying the exchange. Do you mind just pivoting a little bit to talk about some advice for marketers as they think about leveraging these platforms, and to the extent that you can, share some of the insights through the prism of your book for brave marketers? Like, what is the opportunity for them? I'd love to hear some of that.
I think the core of my perspective on all of this is that consumers hold all the power, and that they can bypass anything they don't want. And so the opportunity for most marketers that isn't being taken advantage of is make something that people want. Like, you have the budgets, you have the channels to be able to market and tell lots of people about what you're doing. Think about where you can create unique value for the people you are seeking to reach that only you can deliver, and be generous. Like, create a gift that is going to be beneficial to your business and aligns your content strategy or your marketing or advertising strategy with your marketing goals of letting people know how to position you or raise awareness or begin to trust you and like you and enter into a relationship with you. But start from a place of, much like every content creator does, think audience first. What are the things that can come from you that are not about you? I think there's a lot of opportunity in that space that is currently not being explored enough by most advertisers and marketers.
And could you give us maybe one, for instance, like if you were to advise one of the, top brands that you hear in podcasting, and there's a 50% chance they'll be one of our clients, but I'd love to hear, like, in practical terms, where would you push them to really do better?
Well, it's funny because I don't want to, I don't want to call anybody out for.
Yeah, we don't have to trash what they're doing, but just
Yeah.
in terms of how could you push the boundaries?
It's funny. Maybe I could even just say some of the ones that I think are doing a good job that
Yeah.
might point out
Yeah.
where some of the opportunities are, right? So if I think about, like, there's a whole bunch of stuff around sleep out there, whether it's mattresses or supplements or any of those sorts of things.
Yeah.
I think it was Casper, and I hope I'm not getting this wrong. I think it was Casper that did a podcast series about how to have a better sleep. And it wasn't selling you mattresses. It was about, here's all the stuff that's actually going to be valuable for you about the subject matter that we're huge nerds about, how to have a better sleep. And again, I might be wrong about this, and I hope I'm not misspeaking, but I feel like Blue Apron did a show that was about cooking and not about, like, buy our meal kits. If I think about what are the things that your category is in, and what's the unique expertise you have, and how can you educate people about the goals that they have? Like, why are they buying your product? Is it attached to some other need that they have? Can your ads or your shows be something where people look forward to because they're learning something, or something they can put something into practice in their own life that's going to be like, that brand actually just unlocked something for me, and I know exactly why they did it because they're experts in that space. Suddenly you're like surprised about, wow, this is a very generous thing, and they didn't try and sell me on something, but I like them more because they obviously know who I am and they know their stuff.
Yeah, I can't directly take any credit for it, but our combined organization has worked with both of those brands. And one thing I think sometimes we do, and I think we need to do more of, is, we forget that this is an open field and we're not necessarily just limited by radio clocks and fixed, inventory. And we can do custom content with influencers, with creators, podcasters, and with brands that go deep into the educational aspect. And then we could be using some of those ads to promote that as a way to, kind of create a midpoint in the funnel where people that are curious can just learn more before just going straight to the call to action. And I think it's a tremendous opportunity with YouTube creators, with podcasters, with a lot of the media that we now have.
It's really, it's really obvious. Like, people kind of balk at this idea when you talk about it in a traditional media landscape of like, what if your ads were little shows? But like, what's TikTok? It's people figure out how to tell stories in 30 seconds. People understand how to make shows in 30 seconds or a minute. It can be done.
It can be done.
Yeah. And I think that's the opportunity.
Even if it's a segment within a show, right? It's content first. So
yeah,
that's a great takeaway. And I want to close with that. And I just want to say, not as contentious as I thought it might be. It turns out we see eye to eye on a lot of things, but it was certainly illuminating, and I appreciate you taking the time to join us.
I really enjoyed this, Dan. Thanks so much. I learned a lot, and it is always fun talking about this stuff. It is a confusing area, and every conversation helps me understand it better too.
It is indeed. Okay, to be continued. Thanks again to Steve Pratt for joining in this conversation, and what started as a debate and turned into a number of illuminating ideas around things we agree on. This podcast is brought to you by Oxford Road, where we want you to succeed in audio and creator-based media and to use your influence for good. As members of the marketing community, we have the power to build bridges across differences and preserve fair-minded discussion around the most important topics of our age. That's what's so beautiful about podcasting. If you're a marketer and you're looking to align your brand values with extraordinary business outcomes, reach out to our agency, Oxford Road, by visiting oxfordroad.com and subscribe to our weekly newsletter. It's called The Influencer. It is free and it is the best. If you got feedback for us, we like feedback. Email us, info@mediaroundtable.com. We do have that URL. Don't forget to check out Ad Infinitum. That is by the great Stu Redwine. And it is Oxford Road's audio creative focused podcast. Thanks again to the whole crew: Haley, Ruby, Bianca, Kyle, Ezra, Prince, Everett, Neil, and the team at Podcast One. As always, influence responsibly.